Love you, Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Wale album, Shine. Wale is a DC rapper whose music I've covered a handful of times before. His last album, The Album About Nothing. This record was sort of the commercial successor to his very popular mixtape About Nothing. You know, Wale has some good material back in his mixtape back catalog, but unfortunately, every single time he goes to put out an album, a commercial release, it's like the mediocrities just get to him and he becomes just merely a barely above average rapper. And this has just been the case again and again and again and again. And it's to the point now where apparently Wale on his latest record over here is trying to just really shoot for the stars and do a mainstream grab, a more melodic, a more poppy album this time around. Now, I cannot just merely get into this album and talk about the sounds because, and I was just going to originally do a quick review of this record, but there was a bunch of dramatic bullshit that ensued on Twitter that I have to sort of address here quickly and waste your time and my time. But of course your boy was on the Twitters getting reckless, dropping some hard-nosed opinions about some tracks from this record. And of course Wale had to respond because he responds to everybody. I'm far from the first publication he's had beef with. Now, Wale took issue with my opinion that the song My Love on this record was sort of an ugly attempt at crossing over into a more Caribbean sound, jumping onto that Caribbean craze that's really big right now thanks to Drake and his fake patois. I got this vibe mostly from the fact that Wale brought Diplo and Major Lazer on to produce the track. And what are they known for? Fusing house and Western pop music with Caribbean music, dancehall, reggae, and the like. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like that vibe doesn't turn up in this instrumental just because of what Wale and WizKid and the Sunny lead guitar sampled all over the track are doing. Wale knew what he was doing by bringing Diplo onto this track. If he wanted this song to be some kind of musical heritage purity test, he wouldn't have invited him in the first place. In a recent interview that somebody was throwing around on Twitter in response to this little beef that Wale and I had going, of course Diplo and Major Lazer talk about how they're kind of dipping their toes into these Afro-pop sounds. And in doing this, working with artists like Wale, this is not something that they do all the time. They're just trying it. They're putting their ears to the ground on this sound. And of course, in making that transition, again, those usual Diplo and Major Lazer sounds turn up in the mix. And this is a vibe that I get from no other track on the album. Now, Wale would love you to believe a few things, that this track is a pure expression of Nigerian music despite the fact that Diplo produced it, and he has a London singer on the track too. He would also like you to believe that I'm bullying him and being mean to him, and that I have no idea what Afrobeat or Afropop music is, despite the fact that I've reviewed music that has more of an old school Afrobeat sound to it, pulling influences from not only African music, but soul and jazz and funk music, but also have worked in public radio for years and have looked up to broadcasters like Georges Collinet of Afropop Worldwide, one of the greatest programs you can listen to if you want to know anything about contemporary West African music, specifically Afrobeat, contemporary Afrobeat, and Afropop, which is basically the biggest musical export out of that area. I've just never heard of it. Wale would also like you to believe that I'm trying to step in here and tell him what's what. A is A, and B is B, and C is C, when in reality, all I'm trying to get him to do is just admit the direction that he was trying to go in with this track. I know a Major Lazer beat when I hear one, and this one sounds like an international chop suey of ideas, just like many other instrumentals they pull together for top 40 listeners and electronic dance music listeners who want to feel like they're not in Kansas anymore. So really, no, I'm not telling Wale anything that he doesn't already know. The thing is, Wale doesn't handle opinions very well. But speaking of opinions, here are my thoughts on this album. Honestly, I think it's Wale's worst album so far, because he completely abandons all of the things that made him a somewhat worthwhile artist in the first place, and instead tries to come through with this ultra-melodic, super sappy, super poppy rap record that I don't know who he intends it to appeal to. Running Back with Lil Wayne is one of the most mediocre songs on the entire album, hands down, should not have been the starter for the record. It gets even worse on Scarface, Rose, Gotti, where Wale's singing is god-awful and goofy. It's actually consistently goofy through the entire record. I cannot help but laugh at songs like CC White as Wale is just crooning out, I know liar, And maybe I didn't make this clear enough when I was tweeting about the tracks on this album originally, but what makes these tracks so bad is just Wale's singing voice and the lyrics. It's not that I have a personal issue with the musical style he's shooting for on this album, or even that I think that some publications have said that I'm accusing him of cultural appropriation. If you know anything about my opinion on that subject matter, you'd know that's completely ridiculous. Mostly because I think if you're going to call out Wale for cultural appropriation, you've got to call out everybody for cultural appropriation. And cultural appropriation is the standard in the American music industry. And I don't even really think this is an example of it, specifically the song My Love that I was highlighting. Not only because Wale himself is Nigerian, so how can he be culturally appropriating Nigerian elements of music, but also Caribbean music and dancehall is a pretty big influence in a lot of modern Afro-pop and Afrobeat music, which is a myriad of different modern styles of music. The fact that a dancehall sound would show up in an Afrobeat or an Afro-pop song these days is not an oddity, so how this track could be cultural appropriation, it doesn't even make sense. All I was trying to say in my tweet is what many other people have pointed out already in their reviews of this album, and that is that Wale is trying to go for a more mainstream sound, a more melodic sound on this record, and he's really falling flat on his face because he is not a singer. He could have easily brought other singers on to this record to sing in place of him, and then maybe he just kind of continued to fill that rap role instead. But no, he had to sing all over this record, and God is it terrible. Nowhere is his attempt at singing more miserable than it is on the song My PYT, where he basically bastardizes the legendary Michael Jackson hook with, again, some really lazy singing. There are points on the song where the hook goes My MYPYT, why you would say my and then spell out my immediately after and then continue to spell PYT makes no goddamn sense. Which, I mean, you know, really when you look at this cover, doesn't it just look like anything goes? It's a chubby baby hand grabbing the fucking moon. You know, now that I've said that about the track My PYT, I will say I do think his singing is maybe slightly goofier on the song Fine Girl. I'm a fine girl. Which, if you're talking about modern Afro beats, this song is probably the purest expression of that on this entire album. And in the process, Wale brings on two artists with Nigerian roots to sort of give the track more stylistic legitimacy. Which conceptually is fine, it's just that Wale sounds so awful on the track. But in a way though, on this track, I have to kind of give him some credit because the thing is there aren't a lot of mainstream rap artists right now who are trying to bring an Afro-pop sound to the table. I'm not entirely sure if a Western audience is ready to jump on this sound yet, is ready to embrace this sound in the way that the mainstream has embraced dancehall over the past year or so. But it's one of the few things on this album I can applaud Wale on because it seems legitimately risky. I'm just really not sure what else to say about this album because before Wale turned this whole thing into drama, there really wasn't much to say about this record. Wale is giving up nearly everything that made him somewhat interesting over the years just so he can jump on these buttery smooth instrumentals, this sing-songy pop rap hype train. He takes a few risks here and there, dropping tracks that have more of an Afro-pop influence, one of which is a mix of a couple different sounds because he brought in Diplo and Major Lazer, but really what he's trying to do stylistically on this album is irrelevant because he doesn't have the singing chops to really execute any of it. So I'm feeling a decent to strong opinion on this album because Wale, this is all an opinion. Nobody's picking on you. Nobody's being mean to you. I and no other reviewer out there are telling you what to think or trying to tell you what you're doing because you know what you're doing. Zishin, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and have a nice day. I hope you enjoyed this Wale album more than me. What am I going to say? Forever.